Hi, it's Penny. So I've decided that my wrap-ups have been getting way too long. So now I'm going to do some kind of wrap-up every 4 books because I think that will let me keep this video short. But since the goal is to keep this video short, let's just talk about the last 4 books I read. So the first of the 4 books I read was actually the first book I read in March, and that is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. And actually I was just Googling up a cover image and I discovered that firstly, Shirley Jackson also wrote The Haunting of Hill House, which was recently made into a Netflix series. I haven't read it or watched it, but it was an interesting fact. I also found out that there is a movie version of We Have Always Lived in the Castle, and I really need to find out where I can watch it, because this book was just so creepy and quirky and mysterious, and I really enjoyed it. There were bits where maybe the pacing was a little bit off, and I can't really talk about what happens in this book because it's really spoilers. At the beginning, you're following this girl named Mary Cat. She's in the village. No one else in the village seems to like her. She lives up in some fancy house, but she has to come to the village and she really doesn't enjoy it, and you're left wondering what has happened. Why are the people in the village treating her like that? And it takes quite a while for that to be revealed. And I think trying to figure that out is part of the enjoyment of the story, so I can't talk about it. But there are some wonderfully creepy characters. The main character has such a weird way of thinking about things. And also, I listened to this in audiobook, and I think that the audiobook was really well narrated. I will also say there was a character in the story called Helen Clark, and coming from New Zealand, where our ex-Prime Minister was called Helen Clark, it kind of made the story a little bit weird because every time that character would do something, I couldn't help but picture Helen Clark, the Prime Minister. So then the next thing I read was Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. Brandon Sanderson is one of my favorite authors, and so it's not a surprise that I absolutely loved this. The story follows a girl named Spencer who lives on a world where humans have escaped these creatures called the Krell, who have been at war with humans for a long time. The humans have escaped to this planet, but they're essentially hiding out underground, and they're mainly protected because this planet is surrounded by a lot of debris that makes it hard for the Krell to get through to them. Spencer wants to be a pilot to help protect her people, but unfortunately, her father was a pilot and he ran away during a fight. So now her reputation and her family's reputation are tainted by his reputation. So she's having to kind of fight for respect and also the right to train to be a pilot. But of course, it's Brandon Sanderson, so there is so much more to the story that of course I can't really talk about because it would be more spoilers. And of course, right at the end, there's some reveals that make me so excited for the next book. There was an AI character in this story that is my absolute favoriteest character ever, and I'm so excited to read more about him at some point. Like, I hardly ever laugh during books, and in fact I don't usually even want to, but this book actually made me laugh out loud and I really enjoyed it. There were just some lines that the AI said. He's such a beautiful creature. There's also another creature in here called Doomslug that was just so cute. But also I really liked what the story has to say about friendship and about people finding their own place in the world and about how everybody's different, so what's right for one person isn't necessarily going to be right for another person. And there's a war going on, so I thought it did quite well at accurately representing how awful war can be. Although I wasn't particularly happy about any of the people who died, I think it would have been very unrealistic if people hadn't died. I also like that Brandon Sanderson never really has just these typical bad guys where people are just being bad because they're the bad guy and there's no justification for it. In Brandon Sanderson's novels, including this one, the bad guys always have really good justifications and reasons for the bad things that they're doing, and in fact it's maybe even questionable whether they're really bad at all. And I think that's just so much more like things are in reality. So I really appreciate that. And so of course I just loved this book so much, and I cannot wait for the next book in the series, although I bet it's going to be a bit of a wait. I am still waiting for the second book to The Rhythmatist. Is that what it was called? The Rhythmatist? I think so. The Rhythmatist series, which was a middle grade series that Brandon Sanderson started. Where is that? So hopefully his young adult series, I think this is like his first kind of push into young adult. Hopefully we won't have to wait so long for this one. Then the next thing I read was Once Were Warriors by Duff. So this is a book that was turned into a classic New Zealand movie. This is a story about Maori people in poverty doing terrible things, and it really investigates why they do those things, how broken and lost they are. And I really enjoyed the message and the exploration of the story, although I will say the actual writing style was really hard to read and I didn't enjoy it at all. This is, I think, more literary fiction, and it's very like train of thoughts and made up words that people wouldn't necessarily write but might think. I mean, it's probably true that it does help to really capture the feeling of the story, but it was really hard to read. And in fact, in general, the story was really hard to read because there is just so much violence and so many terrible things happening to children, especially. It's especially hard to read about horrible things happening to children. But there were a couple of things that I really liked about this book. I think I've even got some tabs hidden in here. Oh yeah, here it is. So there's this one paragraph where this guy says, "Do I accuse the storm that destroys my crops? No, I don't accuse the storm. I clean up, then I plant it again." And this part of the story is talking about how, yes, the Pākehā white people are to blame for the situation, like blame is appropriately placed, but I like how it still empowers the Maori people to find a solution for themselves and doesn't make them further slaves to white people in that they have to wait for white people to provide a solution when they're fully capable of saving themselves. I also really liked the message that culture and connectedness can help people who are broken and lost find their way, because at the end of the story, some of the people start getting more connected with their tribe and start making the community better, and that really helps. And I think that that message was a really good message as well. I guess in the end, I ended up giving this 3 stars. I think the subject matter and the messages were really like 4 stars, but the actual writing 2 stars. So overall, in between, it's definitely a New Zealand classic. I think it's a really important piece of New Zealand literature. And I'm probably going to go and rewatch the movie to see. I think they were pretty close, but there were a few differences for sure. And I've got the sequel on my March TBR list, so I'll be reading that soon as well. It'll be really interesting to see what happens next with the father, Jake. Okay, then lastly, I read Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. So this was the 3rd book in the Farseer trilogy, which I read the first 2 books of last month. And this was a 37-hour audiobook. That is really long, and honestly, it did not need to be that long. Our main character, Fitz, is this bastard to the king in waiting. Lots of stuff happens in the first 2 books, lots of political intrigue and battles. But in the 3rd book, he's journeying somewhere to do something that would be spoilers for the first 2 books, but he's journeying. There's a lot of journeying, and it goes on and on and on and on, and it really didn't need to. There was also a new character introduced called Kettle, who was this older woman, and I was honestly convinced that Kettle was actually his assassin trainer, because our main character Fitz was trained as an assassin at one point. So I was convinced that his trainer had actually disguised himself as this woman called Kettle, and I honestly refused to believe it, that it wasn't true until eventually they were in the same room as each other, and I had to admit that maybe I had made that up. So I'd love to hear if anybody else has read that book and also thought the same thing, or if I was just jumping to crazy conclusions. But there were a few things that I did really like about this novel. I really enjoy Fitz has this wolf companion because he's able to connect with the thoughts of animals. And I really liked the wolf's perspective and the different way that he would think about things and how it was contrasted to the way that humans think. Also, my favoriteest character in this whole book was Little Ferret. There is a ferret and he is so cute, so adorable, so tough, and I was so happy with the ending because of that reason. He is such a great little character, even though he's such a minor character, but so great. Also, there are dragons in this book. I had seen before dragons on the cover of the different Farseer trilogy books, and I didn't really know why they were on the cover because I hadn't come across any dragons yet. But there were dragons in this book, and I loved the concept of them. It was a really original concept of dragons. And also there was this other really cool concept in the book that I enjoyed, which is the concept of the white prophets. It talks about how time is a circle, and throughout time there are these white prophets who are helping us to try and cycle time towards a better world. So if all the white prophets don't achieve their goals, the world will get worse and worse, but every white prophet that does achieve their goals makes it easier for the other white prophets to achieve their goals, so you can sort of cycle either way. Either things get worse and worse or things get better and better. And the idea was that if all the white prophets were able to achieve their goals, you would have like a perfect cycle and humanity would be freed from the concept of time, which is such a cool idea. And I almost want to believe that it's true. So I guess to summarize this book, there was a lot of journeying, which was really unnecessary, but at the same time, there were some really cool concepts. I think if it had been like really heavily edited, this book would have been amazing, but instead it was just okay. There are more series set in the same world, and I am definitely going to be reading them, but probably audiobook because they can be slower books. Listening to them as an audiobook really helps to keep getting through it. So I was hoping that this video would be really short, but I have got over 20 minutes of footage. So let's hope that a lot of that was just me mucking around and I can cut it out. I know I did muck around a little bit. So fingers crossed I did a lot more than I thought. But those are the first 4 books that I read in March. Do let me know if you have read any of them, and if you did, what you thought of them, or if there's any of those that sound interesting to you. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.